While you slept, one of Russia's most critical economic arteries was being incinerated. No warning, no defense, no stopping it. A blanket of thick, toxic smoke swallowed Saint Petersburg whole. Not at the front lines, not somewhere deep in the Ukrainian countryside, right in the heart of Russia's second-largest city. Residents woke up choking. Children pressed against windows, staring into blackness where the sky used to be. Emergency services scrambling. Fires still burning hours later. And the Kremlin? Silent. This was not a skirmish. This was not a lucky strike. This was a surgical execution of Russia's most vital oil export infrastructure, planned, precise, and utterly devastating. The war just arrived on Putin's doorstep, and he has no answer. Every major outlet is covering the smoke, the fires, the chaos in St. Petersburg's streets. None of them are telling you what the smoke actually means. They will show you the images. They will quote the Russian governor trying to downplay the damage. They will move on to the next story by tomorrow morning. But here is what they are not telling you. This attack was not just about destroying a port. It was about destroying a system, a financial lifeline, and possibly a social contract that has kept Putin in power for over 2 decades. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to give you the full picture. I will show you exactly why Ust-Luga was the perfect target. I will walk you through the money, every single dollar bleeding out of the Kremlin right now. I will raise the question that no mainstream analyst dares to ask out loud. Stay with me, because this goes much deeper than smoke. Let us start with the facts. Cold, hard, and undeniable. March 29th, 2:30 in the morning, local St. Petersburg time. Residents still awake near the coastline heard it first. Not sirens, not alerts. The sound of engines cutting through the night sky. Then came the flashes. 6 separate explosions lighting up the horizon in rapid succession, one after another. Boom, boom, boom. What witnesses described did not sound like drone strikes. It sounded like an artillery salvo. By 4 in the morning, the fires had spread across more than 5,000 square meters. That is nearly 54,000 square feet of active, chemical-saturated inferno. And it was not slowing down. Emergency services were still battling the blaze at 7 in the morning as St. Petersburg residents were waking up to air they could not breathe. Let that sink in for a moment. Now let us talk about what was actually burning. Ust-Luga is not just any port. According to Reuters, this facility handles approximately 700,000 barrels of oil every single day. 700,000. It operates 18 large storage tanks. It has 9 berths capable of servicing oil tankers weighing up to 150,000 tons. It is directly connected to a Gazprom gas processing plant that handles up to 45 billion cubic meters of natural gas annually. Ukraine hit that plant too, 4 days earlier, on March 25th. This was not one strike. According to Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty, the March 29th attack was the 3rd strike against Ust-Luga in a single week. 3 strikes, 7 days, same target. That is not opportunistic. That is a campaign. And the scale of destruction Ukraine caused this time was unprecedented. 2 of the port's main berths were taken out. Storage tanks obliterated. Transformer stations destroyed. The port was paralyzed. Operations ceased entirely. 700,000 barrels per day. Gone. Meanwhile, the air quality in St. Petersburg collapsed. Monitoring stations recorded fine particle pollution levels, what scientists call PM 2.5, at 15 times above the internationally recognized safe threshold, 15 times. In residential districts like Vasiliostrovsky and Petrogradsky, toxic smog was penetrating through ventilation systems and seeping directly into people's homes. Energy analyst Boris Aronstein described Ukraine's coordinated Baltic strikes as, and I quote, the most serious threat to Russian oil exports since the war began. The receipts are there. The numbers are real. Now let us talk about why. Here is where it gets interesting. Because every analyst covering this story is asking the same surface-level question. Why did Ukraine hit Ust-Luga? The obvious answer is oil revenue. Hurt the money, hurt the war machine. Simple, clean, satisfying. But that explanation does not go nearly deep enough. And if you stop there, you miss the entire strategic picture. Let me give you the real context. Russia is currently earning approximately $760 million per day from its oil and gas exports. Not last year, right now. In fact, that number has been climbing sharply since early this year because of something happening thousands of miles away from Ukraine. Operation Epic Fury in Iran triggered a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical oil choke points on the entire planet. When Hormuz tightens, global oil prices spike. And when global oil prices spike, Russia, even with its heavily sanctioned, deeply discounted crude, prints money. Think about what that means. Putin launched a war that was supposed to cripple his economy. Instead, a completely separate conflict in the Middle East handed him a financial lifeline that nobody predicted. Oil above $100 per barrel. Even selling at a $20 or $30 discount, the Kremlin has been raking in cash at a rate that makes Western sanctions look increasingly ineffective. Ukraine watched this happen, and Ukraine made a decision. If you cannot stop the price of oil from rising, you destroy the infrastructure that ships it. That is the strategic logic behind every single strike we have seen in Russia's Baltic region over the past several weeks. USD Luga and Primorsk together handle a staggering share of Russia's total oil exports. Intelligence analysts estimate that the Baltic corridor accounts for roughly 40% of Russia's daily oil revenue. 40% of $760 million is $304 million. Every single day. Now do the mathematics with me. 1 week of disrupted operations at both ports equals approximately $2.12 billion of oil that cannot be shipped. 1 month equals $9.12 billion. An entire year of sustained, repeated strikes equals somewhere in the vicinity of $111 billion of stranded oil that Putin has to reroute, discount further, or simply lose. And here is the part that makes this even more devastating. Russia does have other ports, Pacific ports, Arctic ports, but those are not viable alternatives, not quickly and not cheaply. Rerouting hundreds of millions of barrels of oil across thousands of additional miles does not happen overnight. Logistics collapse, contracts break down, buyers grow impatient, and impatient buyers find other suppliers. Ukraine is not just burning oil, Ukraine is burning Putin's options. Now, let us get to the question that nobody in mainstream media is asking directly. How did Ukraine actually pull this off? Ust-Luga sits in the Leningrad Oblast. It is hundreds of kilometers from Ukrainian territory. Standard long-range drones, even Ukraine's most capable variants, would struggle to reach this target launching from Ukrainian soil alone. So where did these drones come from? Sky News raised the possibility that Ukraine would have needed to transit through Finnish and Estonian waters to execute a strike of this nature and at this distance. Estonia's own defense forces issued an emergency alert when they detected an unidentified aircraft entering their airspace that night. The alert was later stood down when the drone was identified as Ukrainian, not Russian. Ukrainian. Let that sit for a moment. A Ukrainian drone transited through NATO member airspace, and the strike happened anyway. Now, I am not going to tell you that Finland or Estonia authorized this operation. There is no confirmed evidence of that. But intelligence analysts are looking very carefully at the sequence of events here, because there are really only two possible explanations. Either Ukraine has quietly developed some form of sea-based launch platform, a drone boat, a converted vessel, something operating independently in the Baltic Sea beyond the reach of radar, capable of deploying long-range strike drones against targets deep inside Russian territory. Or something else enabled this. Something that, if confirmed, would represent the single most significant escalation in NATO's relationship with this conflict since the war began. If this pattern holds, if Ukraine has genuinely cracked the problem of projecting drone power into the Baltic from sea platforms, then the entire map of vulnerable Russian infrastructure just expanded overnight, permanently. Putin is not just dealing with a damaged port right now. He is dealing with the terrifying possibility that nowhere near the Baltic is safe anymore, and he has absolutely no idea how Ukraine did it. Let me bring this closer to home, because right now you might be thinking, this is a war story. This is about ports and drones and Russian oil terminals. What does any of this have to do with my life? Everything. It has everything to do with your life. Let us start with the most immediate connection: oil prices. Remember, we are already operating in a global energy market that has been destabilized by the Strait of Hormuz blockade. Oil is already above $100 per barrel. The entire global economy is already absorbing that pressure. Every time you fill your tank, every time your grocery bill climbs a little higher because transportation costs more, every time a small business raises its prices because energy overhead has become unsustainable, that is the Hormuz effect reaching into your daily life. Now layer the Baltic strikes on top of that. Russia cannot simply absorb the loss of Ust-Luga and Primorsk and keep shipping oil as if nothing happened. Those barrels have to go somewhere, or they go nowhere. When millions of barrels per day get rerouted through Arctic and Pacific ports, the logistical cost of every single barrel increases dramatically. Russia passes that cost on through deeper discounts to buyers like India and China, which means those buyers have even less incentive to pay market rates elsewhere. Global supply chains shift, markets recalibrate, and somewhere in that recalibration, prices at your gas station do not go down. Think about what that means for the next 6 months. But the economic ripple does not stop at your fuel pump. Consider what happens inside Russia itself. Putin's war in Ukraine runs on a very specific financial engine. Oil revenue funds military salaries. Oil revenue purchases ammunition. Oil revenue keeps the political machinery of the Kremlin operational and loyal. Every day that Ust-Luga sits paralyzed, every day that Primorsk operates below capacity, that engine loses fuel. Fewer dollars flowing into Moscow means harder choices about where to cut. Do you pay your soldiers? Do you restock your missile inventory? Do you maintain the social spending programs that keep Russian civilians from asking uncomfortable questions about why this war is still happening? Ukraine understands this arithmetic better than any Western think tank. And here is the dimension that almost nobody is talking about: the buyers. India and China have been purchasing Russian oil at steep discounts, essentially keeping Putin economically viable despite Western sanctions. But those buyers are rational economic actors. When supply becomes unreliable, when ports keep getting struck, when shipments keep getting delayed, those buyers start hedging. They start diversifying their supply chains. They start calling suppliers who can actually guarantee delivery. The moment India or China begins seriously reducing its Russian oil purchases, the entire financial foundation of Putin's war effort begins to crack in ways that no sanction package has managed to achieve so far. Ukraine figured out something that took Western policymakers 3 years to almost grasp. You do not win this by fighting at the front lines alone. You win this by making the machine that funds the front lines too expensive to operate. And every barrel of Russian oil sitting in a burning storage tank at Ust-Luga right now is proof that the strategy is working. Now, here is what I actually want you to think about. Every analyst, every outlet, every defense commentator covering this story has landed on the same conclusion. Ukraine hit Ust-Luga to hurt Russia's oil revenue, to drain the war chest, to slow the machine. That analysis is correct, but it is also incomplete. And stopping there means missing the most consequential dimension of what happened on March 29th. The real target was never the port. The real target was the sky above Saint Petersburg. Think about what Ukraine actually accomplished beyond the burning tanks and paralyzed berths. It filled the air of Russia's second-largest city with toxic chemical smoke visible from 15 miles away. It forced millions of ordinary Russian civilians, people who have never set foot near a battlefield, to wake up on a spring morning and breathe poison, to look out their windows and see not sunrise, but a wall of black death rolling across their city. You cannot sanitize that. You cannot spin that. You cannot make that disappear with a government press release. And here is where it becomes politically devastating for Putin in ways that go far beyond economics. The Kremlin has spent 3 years selling the Russian public a very specific story. The war is distant. The war is controlled. The war is necessary, and it is being won. Stay calm. Trust the process. Trust me. That story required one absolutely non-negotiable condition: that the Russian homeland remain visibly, tangibly safe. Putin can control the information. He cannot control the air. On March 29th, that condition was shattered. Not metaphorically, literally. Citizens in the Vasily-Ostrovsky district were not reading about the war on a government-approved website. They were tasting it. They were coughing it out of their lungs. And simultaneously, the Kremlin's new internet whitelist system, introduced just days earlier, meant that those same citizens could not access independent information to understand what was happening to them. Let that contradiction settle for a moment. Toxic air pouring through your ventilation system, government websites telling you everything is under control, no access to anything else. This is not just a military operation. This is a psychological pressure campaign of extraordinary precision. History offers a very clear lesson here that intelligence analysts are paying close attention to. The Soviet Union did not collapse because it ran out of weapons. It collapsed because ordinary people stopped believing the system was protecting them. The moment the gap between official reality and lived experience became too wide to ignore, the entire structure began to crack from within. Ukraine is methodically engineering that gap inside modern Russia. Every strike that sends smoke over a Russian city, every explosion that residents film from their rooftops, every morning that school children cannot go outside because the air is dangerous. Each of these events widens the distance between what Putin tells Russians and what Russians can see, smell, and feel with their own bodies. If this pattern holds, and the frequency and precision of these strikes suggest it will, Ukraine is not just degrading Russia's oil infrastructure, it is degrading something far more fragile and far more important. The belief that Putin's Russia can protect its own people, the man who promised safety, the man who promised victory, the man who promised the war would stay far away. That promise is burning, and the smoke is visible for miles. So let us be very clear about where we stand right now. Ust-Luga is burning. Primorsk is vulnerable. Russia's entire Baltic oil network is operating under a threat it has no proven defense against. The financial bleeding is measured in hundreds of millions of dollars per day. The psychological damage inside Russia's own cities is impossible to quantify and impossible to contain. And Ukraine has not stopped. Here's the question I want to leave you with. If Ukraine has genuinely developed a sea-based drone launch capability operating independently in the Baltic Sea, what is the next target? Because Ust-Luga and Primorsk are ports. They are visible. They are already being watched. But Saint Petersburg's power infrastructure is not a port. The rail lines feeding Russia's northwestern military supply chain are not a port. The facilities that keep $300 billion worth of Arctic energy projects operational are not a port. If this pattern holds, the map of what Ukraine can reach just expanded in ways that nobody in Moscow was prepared for. And here is the second question nobody can answer yet. If a NATO member state quietly enabled any part of this operation, what happens the day Russia decides it has proof? That answer could change everything. Subscribe, because this story is not finished. It is not even close to finished. And the next chapter is going to be bigger than anything you watch today.